adhere to it. It may emit a component of the fuel used on board the Challenger, which can be harmful just on initial contact. We should show you what NASA is showing us. STS-107 was the name of this mission, and there you have it. That's what we're getting from them. This graphic will come down and be replaced by a live image of what we presume to be a podium. Administrator O'Keefe will come out and read a statement. We have yet to have a declaration of death, of course, by NASA for these 7 souls on board the spacecraft today. It's a distinction that'll certainly be important to the families, but all of our experts, Jay Barbary among them, several veteran astronauts are confirming that it is just beyond mathematically impossible for anyone to survive such a catastrophic breakup at such a speed. We're talking about something that happened 39 miles above the Earth. Space begins at roughly 60 miles, so basically double that. This spacecraft was going 12,000 miles an hour. As you look at the members of this crew, all of them astounding resumes, biographical information, so many of them veterans of more than one shuttle flight. The point we made earlier in our coverage, it is just part of the makeup, the DNA of astronauts, those who push the edge of the envelope, the phrase made popular by author Tom Wolfe, that there will be another crew in line for the next mission who won't think twice about the safety of going up. It is what they do. It's what they do for a living. They are a brave, patriotic, and almost universally very smart bunch. Jay Barbary, we were making the point earlier on that they are, when you walk into a room, they are identifiable. You can pick out the astronaut. There is something about them, and they are constant dinner speakers and event speakers around this country for good reason. They have astounding stories to tell, and they're almost intoxicating to be around.
That is true, Brian. They are a cut above most people, as you said, and they really stand out. It's hard not to notice an astronaut when they walk in the room. You don't have to be told, as you said, that they are an astronaut. You know when those people walk in the room, there is something outstanding about this person. There's something extraordinary about this person, and that goes for every one of them. That goes up there, and you know the commander now of the next mission is to be Eileen Collins. She was the first woman to command a mission, and she is to command the mission to the International Space Station. It was scheduled to take off on March the 1st to head to the space station, but I think that we can say that that won't take place at this time. How long it'll be, we don't know. How long the shuttles will be grounded, we don't know. Until they get a firm handle on what happened today, and they have fixed it, and they feel that the shuttle is precisely safe to fly again, that's when they will fly them. How long they will leave the 3 people on board the International Space Station is another outstanding question. Will they stay up there a full year, year and a half? They could do it with the supplies. They've done it. We've had people stay over a year on the Mir space station. So they could stay up there. And they have their escape vehicle up there, the Soyuz, so that they can leave in case of an emergency any time. But all of these questions have to be answered depending on what happened that caused this catastrophe this morning.
Jay, when we talk about the data coming in, real-time data streaming in from this spacecraft, is it more than they were able to know during Challenger? Are there more screens that are up and running? Are there more sensors telling them the shape of more telemetry in general?
Yeah, possibly some more, but I'm not aware of any more because it's the space, that STS-107 stands for Space Transportation System. And as far as I know, it's the same systems. They have updated systems. In fact, Columbia has been updated and overhauled in the last couple of years. It has what they call the glass cockpit. That's where they read, the pilots read the stuff actually on the windshield in front of them. So it's got the latest navigation equipment on board. It's not the same navigation equipment that was there, for example, 22 years ago when John Young and Robert Crippen took off on April the 12th, 1981. So anyway, it's essentially the same, though, as it was Challenger. It's not that much different.
Any people who've been allowed to peek inside the cockpit, perhaps while boarding a commercial jet, know what Jay's talking about when he mentions a glass cockpit. It has replaced in so many of the more modern commercial aircraft the old dials that were on aircraft cockpits. In many cases, they are duplicated with graphics on a data screen because pilots are so often taught to think in an analog fashion. They can only look down and glance, and a needle should be where it should be. So just as digital speedometers didn't live a very long and prosperous life on cars because people wanted to see relationships, many of the dials and gauges are duplicated, but it is done so as part of a streamlining of the cockpit. This modern cockpit of this space shuttle looks nothing like it did when it first went up. It was much more of a maze of smaller controls than it is now. We're looking now at some video taken in zero-G conditions on board the spacecraft. The Challenger, Columbia, all of them, Discovery, all of them in the flight are not only modes of transportation, they really are home for the days where the astronauts spend en route to, it's been, the space station has been their destination more often than not lately, en route to the space station and home again. Sad to see some of that video, knowing what we know, knowing what we suspect today, and that is the loss of the 7 NASA astronauts. If you're just joining us, we're waiting a press statement from the NASA Administrator, Sean O'Keefe. Jay, tell us about Sean O'Keefe. A lot of Americans were familiar with Dan Golden because of his longtime tenure of NASA.
Well, Sean O'Keefe is what they call, in today's conversation, a bean counter. He came from the side of Washington, D.C., where they keep track of every dollar, and they thought that by bringing Sean O'Keefe in, that he would get NASA's dollar house in order. They had been spending too much money, more money than they had programmed, and they were like, had a $4 billion deficit, and Sean O'Keefe came in to do that. So far, I would grade Sean as a watcher on the outside, as a journalist. I would grade him with at least a B+. He's been doing a very good job in putting NASA's house in order, and this is, I know, is something that it's going to be terrible for him to have to deal with because he's only been on board, I'm just doing this from memory now, about a year, and so it's going to be a little difficult because Dan Golden had been around for many years, as you said, and now this is Sean O'Keefe's yoke, if you will, to bear, and he'll be dealing with it.
Jay, the journalist William Burroughs, who was with us earlier, said that members of Congress really do bear a responsibility here, that the space program isn't further along than it is now. Who are the champions of space exploration in Washington, and what would it take for Americans to express a desire that, yes, we would like this to go back to being a national priority as it was when John Kennedy vowed to make it to the moon by the end of the decade?
Well, in my humble opinion, the champions of the space program have always been the visionaries. The problem that the space program has always had with Congress is because Congress will penny pinch. And in the loss of the Challenger, it proved that had they given NASA the solid rocket, one-stage solid rocket boosters that they wanted from the beginning, that they would have saved a lot more money because they had to replace Challenger. Not only did they lose 7 lives, they had to spend $2.5 billion to replace Challenger. The engineers wanted from the get-go a single solid rocket motor, which was much more safe than the 3 stages. And that's why they had to go through with the J joint and to build what they did. So they wound up spending a lot more money than they would have spent if they had done it right in the first place. And again, we might see that in this accident. We don't know yet what caused this. But in every case, when you're dealing with electronics and you're dealing with science on the cutting edge, if you try to penny pinch, you will find that you are going to wind up costing a lot more than if you had spent the money you should have spent to begin with. So I go back to answer your question about the people who are the heroes are the visionaries. And you mentioned John F. Kennedy, and I will never forget when the man said, first of all, he brought the experts into his office, and he asked them, what can we do before the Russians can do it? Can they get to the moon before us? And they said, yes, they can get to the moon before us. He says, how about Mars? Can we get to Mars before them? Yes, we can get to Mars before them. So his decision was, should I commit spacecraft to Mars? That our goal is going to be to get to Mars. And he was thinking about trying to do that in 20 years instead of 10 years. But he went back to the Apollo program, back to the moon, and 400,000 people were put to the task of Apollo, and it cost $24 billion and something dollars. That included the Mercury, the Gemini program, and Apollo. And we got there, and we got there before the decade was out. And the only time that we got in trouble, Brian, was when Lyndon Johnson decided for his re-election in 1968 to push for us to get a man on the moon before the election so that that would offset the problems that he was having with the Vietnam War. When he started pushing to do that, then they started cutting corners, and we had the Apollo 1 fire. So then that cost us a year to get over that and get back, and we still made it. But they had to bring people back in here that had the experience rather than giving the contract to inexperienced people, which they did. And they had to slow down, and they had to do it right. So when they came back and they did it right, we had a good success with the moon. Everybody thought that possibly, we'd lose a crew on the moon. Everybody thought that Pete Conrad would be the first man to step on the moon with Apollo 12. It would not be Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin. They thought that Neil Armstrong and Buzz would have to abort. Well, they almost had to, because they had a computer overload going down that told them 2 or 3 times to abort. But the guy that was writing the computer kept saying, keep going, keep going, keep going. They were okay because he knew it was executive overload on the computer that was giving them an abort. And he was right. So it was people that were right on top of things at the same time it was doing what the heck they were supposed to be doing that got us on the moon and got us back. You had the explosion of the service module oxygen tank on Apollo 13. And, we almost lost the lives of Jim Lovell and his crew, and they had to go around the backside of the moon and come back. And they had they not been docked to the lunar module was the lifeboat that saved them. So the only time that you really get into trouble is when you try to cut corners.
Jay Barbary from the Cape, where he, along with us, awaits this statement by the NASA administrator. I've been handed some facts correcting some of what we were saying earlier, and had I done the math, this wouldn't have happened. The shuttle was traveling at 18 Mach when it went down. Last contact, 9 a.m. This morning, local time, 16 minutes prior to the time when it was to touch down. That's moving quickly across the country at an altitude of 39 miles up when it was last heard from. 18 Mach was the speed, and we will be seeing, we've been watching this home video over and over. We will, as more people with home video cameras approach 24-hour cable news networks, over-the-air television networks like this one through our local affiliates out in the Texas area, we will be seeing more and more views and vantage points of this tragedy that apparently has played itself out in the skies over Texas today, with all 7 souls on board Columbia believed lost in this catastrophic failure of the Space Shuttle's 113th manned mission into space, the 144th manned mission into space by the United States. Conditions being what they are in this country, A lot of thoughts when the news was first learned this morning turned to the specter of terrorism. We can report with great confidence at this hour that there is absolutely nothing to that. That for this to have been terrorism would require a technology not known to exist on the Earth, and that is a satellite to space shuttle shot fired, an ordnance of some type, an ability in the inner reaches of outer space to shoot down a moving spacecraft, and that does not exist, as we have been told many times by the government today. Jim Miklaszewski is our man at the Pentagon all day long today, including the early hours when I'm sure they weren't so sure early on, Mick.
Well, there was some immediate early speculation that perhaps this was some kind of terrorist act, but military officials put that to rest very quickly for a couple of reasons that you raised, Brian. First of all, it was at 200,000 feet. There is no known military weapon in the hands of any country or terrorist organization that could be launched from the Earth to shoot it down, and it's unclear as to exactly what the speed was when the shuttle accident occurred, when the explosion actually occurred. We're told by some of the Air Force experts that as the shuttle begins to descend and break into the atmosphere, there's a period there where it actually slows down significantly. But at any rate, it was going tens of thousands of miles per hour at the time that the explosion occurred. So that would pretty much eliminate any possibility that there would be any kind of earthbound weapon that could do that. And as one official had said, it would have to be a space satellite shooting a weapon, and that kind of thing just doesn't exist. And when you look at the Pentagon and their efforts to intercept and shoot down ICBMs, you know, it's the missile defense system that has undergone testing for many years, and even with the most highly sophisticated weaponry and technology that they have, their success rate isn't all that good. It's very difficult under controlled circumstances. And in addition, one question was raised, could a bomb have been placed aboard the shuttle before it took off? That too pretty much ruled out, considered not a possibility. The security at Cape Canaveral, what had already been increased significantly after September 11th, and from what we understand from NASA officials, that security around this flight was especially high because of the presence of the Israeli astronaut, the Israeli Air Force Colonel Ramon. So any hint, although the conspiracy theorists will certainly crawl out of the woodwork, as they do in any kind of event like this, any hint that this was a terrorist act has been dismissed by the officials in the know. There was, early on, when people were trying to figure out exactly what happened, we are told that at least one U.S. military spy satellite, an infrared satellite that is designed to scan the Earth's surface to watch for any kind of missile launches in any country, any kind of explosion such as a nuclear test, did in fact detect what they call a heat spike in the vicinity of the Columbia shuttle at about the same time that the explosion occurred. And this satellite not only would have been able to detect any kind of explosion, but would also have been able to accurately track the flight path of the burning Columbia shuttle as it descended to Earth. NASA, of course, has said much of its communications had been knocked out almost immediately, so it may be somewhat difficult for them to have tracked the exact path, but there are satellites in orbit that could certainly have done that, and if not give them a clue as to what happened, at least follow its flight path. Now, in terms of search and rescue, anytime a shuttle takes off from Cape Canaveral or is preparing to land, the U.S. military does have helicopters in the region to take part in any kind of possible search and rescue effort should there be some kind of catastrophic event. As there was in the Challenger during 1986, there were helicopters already in the air. Unfortunately, there was little they could do because it appeared that the astronauts had been killed in the initial blast. But those helicopters were already in the air. In the case photographs of the Columbia shuttle today, there were no military assets in the air in the flight path over North Texas. It just didn't seem well, obviously nobody foresaw this catastrophe occurring, and any kind of search and rescue would have been around the site itself.
Jim,
but since then, the U.S. military...
We got a flight with a few statements about STS-107. We will have no questions today, just a few brief remarks.
As indicated earlier, we'll make a statement today, and then at this point, and a little later this afternoon at about 3 o'clock Eastern Time, there'll be a full technical briefing conducted from the Johnson Space Center. So at this point, we're just going to give you the circumstances as we understand them leading up to this particular tragedy today. This is indeed a tragic day for the NASA family, for the families of the astronauts who flew on STS-107, and likewise tragic for the nation. Immediately upon indication of a loss of communications on STS-107, at a little after 9 a.m. this morning, we began our contingency plan to preserve all the information relative to the flight activities. I immediately advised the President and the Secretary of Homeland Security, Secretary Tom Ridge, at the point after landing was due to have occurred at 9:16. Spoke to them very briefly thereafter to advise that we had lost contact with the shuttle orbiter Columbia and STS-107 crew. They offered, the President specifically offered, full and immediate support to determine what the appropriate steps were thereafter to be taken. We then spent the next hour and a half working through the detail and information of what we have received, and Bill Reedy will walk you through the specifics of those operational and technical issues here in just a moment. Thereafter, we have met with the family members of the astronauts who were here at Kennedy Space Center and are soon to be departing back to Johnston, to Houston. The President has called and spoken to them to express our deepest national regrets. We have assured them that we will begin the process immediately to recover their loved ones and understand the cause of this tragedy. At this time, we have no indication that the mishap was caused by anything or anyone on the ground. We've assembled a mishap investigation team that immediately was assembled upon the point of past the stage in which the orbiter was to have landed here at Kennedy Space Center a little after 9:30, and that team in turn is coordinating on a regular basis on all the facts that are pertaining to this from the Johnson Space Center, and a rapid response team from here at the Kennedy Space Center, as well as participants from the Marshall Space Flight Center in Huntsville, Alabama. In addition to these internal efforts, we have also appointed a mishap investigation board, an external group of people who are independent from NASA, who will immediately be charged with the opportunity to look at all the information that was immediately locked down right after our absence of communications. Each of these individuals are safety and mission assurance related officials in other federal departments of the federal government, from the Air Force, from the Navy, from the Department of Transportation, and across the federal expanse. The investigation team will also be chaired by an individual contacted to serve who is external to the federal agencies, and will have the opportunity to coordinate all the information again from an external view. So we'll be conducting both the internal activity as well as an external review immediately to ascertain the causes and circumstances under which this tragedy occurred. We've pulled together all the federal agencies and local governments as well. In discussion several times this morning with Secretary Tom Ridge, the effort is heavily underway to coordinate an understanding of exactly where the orbiter path had taken it from West Texas towards the Kennedy Space Center here in Florida, and to make sure that the material on the ground is secured so that the investigation can begin promptly. We would urge anyone who believes they have discovered or found any material to stay away from it and to please contact local officials. The local first responder groups for emergency services and so forth have been authorized and directed by Secretary Tom Ridge to assist in all manner. The Federal Emergency Management Agency is coordinating that effort on the part of the Department of Homeland Security. I was here this morning with the families of the astronauts and their friends. It started out as a pretty happy morning, awaiting the landing of STS-107. And we had highly anticipated their return because we couldn't wait to congratulate them for their extraordinary performance and their excellent efforts on the science mission on this very important flight. They dedicated their lives to pushing the scientific challenges for all of us here on Earth. And they dedicated themselves to that objective and did it with a happy heart, willingly, and with great enthusiasm. The loss of this valiant crew is something we will never be able to get over, and certainly the families of all of them, we have assured we will do everything we can possibly do to guarantee that they work their way through this horrific tragedy. We ask the members of the media to honor that too. To please respect their privacy and please understand the tragedy that they are going through at this time. We will help the media assure that be the case as well. We trust that the prayers of the nation will be with them and with their families. And again, a more courageous group of people you could not have hoped to know than the families of these crew members. And an extraordinary, extraordinary group of astronauts who gave their lives and did it in a way that they knew exactly the risk, but never, ever, do we ever want to see a circumstance where something like this could ever happen. And we diligently dedicate ourselves every single day to assuring these things don't occur. And when they do, we have to act responsibly, accountably, and that's exactly what we will do. To give you more of the operational detail of what has occurred here since 9 a.m. this morning, the Associate Administrator for Spaceflight, a former astronaut, retired captain of the United States Navy, former test flight pilot, Bill Reedy, who has commanded 2 separate missions previously and as an astronaut, and is now, again, our Associate Administrator for Spaceflight, has worked with me all morning along with all of us here at Kennedy Space Center to work through the details of the events as we know them and to present to you the facts that we understand them. Again, the technical details that are being worked very diligently now will be covered again at 3 p.m. this afternoon out of the Johnson Space Center. With that, let me turn it over to Captain Bill Reedy.
Thank you, John.
It's a truly difficult day for all of us. Many of us were standing alongside the runway waiting to celebrate their triumphant return after a 16-day science mission. I think you could tell from the downlink that they loved what they were doing and they thought what they were doing was extremely important, pushing back those boundaries in science. At 9 o'clock, we heard that they had lost data from the spacecraft, and it appears that that was at about 200,000 feet, about Mach 18. The loss of data was somewhere over north central Texas, and at the planned landing time of 9:16, we initiated our contingency action plan called the Rescue Coordination Center and initiated a search and rescue effort. Sadly, I think from the video that's available, it does not appear that there were any survivors. We have currently impounded all the data, including all the pre-flight certification of flight readiness for STS-107. And at this point, I'd have to say it's too early to speculate about the exact cause. Obviously, we're looking at all the data that we have available. Those people that have videos, those people that have still pictures, we'll urge you to contact NASA so that we can coordinate those things that might be available. And to reiterate what the administrator said, those people that may find debris, do not touch it, do not move it. Contact your local authorities, have them impound it and secure the area so that our technical specialists will be able to piece together the puzzle so that we can resolve what happened. Our immediate focus is on the crew families, and we spent some time with them. The President called. I'd have to say the families are bearing up with an incredible amount of dignity considering their loss. We all grieve for them. We all pray with them for the crew. But one thing came across loud and clear when visiting with them is they knew that the crew was absolutely dedicated to the mission that they were performing. And I think you could see that in the video downlink. They believed in what they were doing. And in the conversations with the crew and their families, they said that we must find what happened and fix it and move on. And we can't let their sacrifice be in vain. Today was a very stark reminder that this is a very risky endeavor, pushing back the frontiers in outer space, and after 113 flights, unfortunately, people have a tendency to look at it as something that is more or less routine. Well, I can assure you it is not. Each and every time I flew, each and every time my colleagues flew, we treated that with the respect that it deserved from a professional standpoint. And I have to say that as the one responsible for shuttle and station within the NASA, that I know that the people of NASA did everything possible preparing for this flight to make it as perfect as possible. My promise to the crew and to the crew families is that the investigation that we have just launched will find the cause, we'll fix it, and then we'll move on. Thank you.
Again, we know you all have questions, and we will have a news briefing at 3 o'clock, and we'll give you that opportunity at that time. Thank you.
That will be it. That will be it for now. As you heard from NASA, a very emotional view of this accident from a man who was, as he said, waiting on the runway for this crew, friends and acquaintances of his, co-workers, colleagues, and fellow space travelers to return from their mission on board Shuttle Columbia. We want to go to Jay Barbary, our veteran correspondent covering this part of the world. And Jay, anything stand out from what you heard there?
No, it's pretty much what we expected, Brian. They've got everything into place. All of the studies have started. They'll be looking at everything, including all of the videotape that they can bring together that people shot from the ground. They'll be checking with the Pentagon. They'll be checking with NORAD out at Colorado Springs. They'll be looking at anything that our satellites may have recorded from space itself. They'll be putting all the pieces together and trying to come up with an answer to what happened. And that's pretty much it. There will be a news conference, as they said, at 3 o'clock, assuming they meant 3 o'clock our time, and that will take place in Houston with some of the more technical people there. We may get a little bit more information. However, I doubt it. I think it'll probably be at least 2, 3, 4, 5 days before they'll really have any idea of what happened, Brian.
Jay Barbary, okay, stay with us. We'll be going back to you. The public is involved in more than one way